This is a recording of We Have Tomorrow, the story of American Seventh-day Adventists with an African heritage, by Lewis B. Reynolds. Introduction. In the story of the Pilgrim landing at what is now Plymouth, Massachusetts, there is no mention of a black presence in this early U.S. colony. But in the decades of the 1970s, Marjorie Anderson, who grew up in Plymouth, discovered on a moonlit night 4 small grave markers encircled by the remains of an old wooden fence. They were burial places of 4 black settlers. "Something came over me," she recalled. "Suddenly I knew, I had no doubt, that this place would mean a great deal to me. It was almost like a religious experience. I made up my mind to come back." Marjorie Anderson did go back again and again, with the zeal of an evangelist. In 6 years, she converted that forgotten graveyard into an archaeological treasure trove listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The cemetery, located 4 miles from Plymouth Rock and in a town awash with historic sites, might easily be considered one more designated area of little import, except that this one marked that strain of America's heritage that is black, right back to the Pilgrims. "I grew up in Plymouth, but never felt a part of the historical community," Miss Anderson continued. "It was not that there was a conscious effort to exclude blacks, but it was as if everybody assumed that blacks just weren't here. All the black school children who came here on class trips never saw a reflection of themselves. Well, now they will." The cemetery that so moved Miss Anderson that moonlit night is called Parting Ways. The site is at a fork on the road. At one time, it served a black settlement of perhaps 30 residents. Miss Anderson, a woman in her late 20s at the time the graves were officially recognized, said that although she had not previously taken time out to search for evidence of the old settlement, she had known about it from girlhood. Her parents had told her the story of its founders. They were 4 black men: Cato Howe, Prince Goodwin, Plato Turner, and Kwamani Quash. In 1792, the 4 were granted freedom and 94 acres of land as a reward for service in the Revolutionary War. When the last house in the settlement burned down in 1908, the land reverted to the town, its history forgotten. Ironically, Miss Anderson recalled, the town had plans to turn the land into, of all things, a cemetery. Instead, the town has leased the land to the corporation Miss Anderson organized. That was after she pored over musty records, wrote letters, begged money, talked to more than 40 archaeologists and historians, and finally got Parting Ways excavated and studied. The diggers found pottery and other artifacts suggesting African origins. In the course of all her research, Miss Anderson located in California a descendant of one Abraham Pierce. Records indicate Pierce to be the black slave of ship captain John Pierce, who arrived in Plymouth aboard the vessel Anne in 1623, when the colony was less than 3 years old. Like early accounts of American history, and indeed the narratives of most of the nation's social and religious organizations, Seventh-day Adventist history texts have some noticeable gaps in the record of the denomination's considerable black following. This book is an attempt to tell the story of participation by these men and women, both laymen and ministers. At a time when they were numerically few, Seventh-day Adventists touched the lives of many influential leaders in America and thus drew attention to important tenets of their faith. Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, John D. Rockefeller Jr., Alfred DuPont, and President William Howard Taft were among those who visited Battle Creek Sanitarium, or one of its satellite institutions. Also among the notables who came to Battle Creek was Booker T. Washington, principal of world-famous Tuskegee Institute. Washington was especially fascinated by the invigorating baths and the diet therapy that had done much for people such as oilman Harry Sinclair and Ellie Phillips, Red Cross founder Clara Barton, and Edgar Welch, grape juice producer. Washington's wife arranged for one of the young men trained at Battle Creek to come to Tuskegee and set up treatment facilities for her husband using Battle Creek techniques. Fortunately for the Adventist cause, Dr. Kellogg did not share the prejudice and discrimination toward Negroes that was so widely practiced in the United States of his day. Kellogg had adopted several black children among other orphans he raised, and thus his attitude and viewpoint were instantly recognized as that of an apostle of justice and impartiality. Booker T. Washington was no doubt impressed with this trait so evident in Kellogg. Through many years, Negro Adventists have come into prominence and held positions of responsibility out of proportion to their numbers within the community. Jim Pearson, a graduate of the old Battle Creek Health Institute, returned to the South and set up treatment rooms in Birmingham. When he was arrested in Birmingham for some minor offense, the judge learned of his treatment rooms and spread the information far and wide. The result was that Jim Pearson included among his clients many white judges, congressmen, and leading businessmen of the South. In Los Angeles, Ruth J. Temple instituted a citywide health week, a well-publicized physical fitness program that since has been adopted as the health plan for some 40 major U.S. cities. Emma Dillard, a well-known mortician in Brooklyn, New York, was an ardent member whose business ability was readily recognized by conference leaders. Her advice was sought both by her local church and the Greater New York Conference. The Dillard Funeral Home is still a flourishing entity in Brooklyn. William H. Green, an attorney who joined the Adventist Church shortly after the turn of the century, argued cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. Early in her career as an educator, his wife had co-founded Voorhees Industrial School in Denmark, South Carolina. Wileen Sazon Dorsey, a member of the Southwest Region Conference Committee, was an outstanding businesswoman in New Orleans, Louisiana. She was a leading officer in the Standard Life Insurance Company and part owner of the business. Eva B. Dykes, the first Negro woman to complete requirements for the PhD degree, became an Adventist shortly after she was graduated cum laude from Radcliffe College. She was widely heralded as one of the outstanding young women of the nation. Frank W. Hale, who became an Adventist about 1935, began a salvage and used book business in Topeka, Kansas, which came to be so prominently known that he was invited to conduct the March of Dimes drive for the city of Topeka. His son, Frank Jr., was granted a PhD degree from the University of Nebraska and was later president of Oakwood College. Later, as vice provost of Ohio State University, he made possible higher education programs for numerous Adventist young people who otherwise would not have been able to pursue this specialized training. In later years, a larger number of people with high-level offices in government have arisen to make their contribution to the general society while witnessing for their faith. Wilbert Cheatham of Silver Spring, Maryland, was made Deputy Director of Civil Rights for the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Helen Wiggin Beckett of Dallas, Texas, became a field investigator for the Southwestern Office of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Her job included conferences with builders and developers who held government contracts in the 5 states, an on-site inspection to determine whether federal guidelines were being violated. Jesse Godley Bradley, an Oakwood graduate with a PhD degree from the University of Connecticut, in 1973 was appointed Director of Elementary Schools for the city of New Haven. Perhaps the most outstanding city government position held by a Black Adventist was that of Eunice Winston, a treasurer of the city of San Diego. Judge Andrew K. McDonald, a graduate of Rutgers University Law School and a member of the Allegheny East Conference Committee, was appointed Judge of the Family Division of the Newark, New Jersey Municipal Court. Colonel Leonard Johnson, an Air Force flight surgeon, headed a special government mission to relocate thousands of Vietnamese left homeless after the fall of Saigon. Wilbur M. Cato was named Auditor of the Year in 1972 by the U.S. Army Tank Automotive Command for a money-saving procedure he set up that is used by government auditors around the world. In one instance alone, the Army saved an estimated $40.5 million by implementing Cato's auditing technique. Dr. Kenneth Singleton, who graduated with highest honors from Howard University Medical School, became an Air Force flight surgeon to Vice President Walter Mondale. Colonel Joseph T. Powell, at the time of his retirement from the Army, was the highest-ranking Black Adventist in their chaplaincy program. In the building trades, Burrell Scott, a local church elder in Oberlin, Ohio, and a masonry contractor, has handled multi-million-dollar jobs as far away as New York State. Scott built the county building in Elyria, Ohio, in addition to the Oberlin College Music Building and several Holiday Inns and housing projects. For many years, Carter's Nursing Home, funded by Esby and Bessie Carter, was the most prosperous business in Oberlin. In Greenville, Mississippi, Robert Seard, a church officer, had the largest house-moving enterprise in the entire state. Recognition of this fact was noted in a story about his work in Ebony magazine. The story in this volume, while it takes note of the successes of Black Seventh-day Adventists in business and the professions, is principally concerned with their spiritual loyalties. Certainly, in the revelation of their lives, the secret strivings of other lives come into view. We have traced a frail thread of chivalry and faith in the early efforts to spread the Adventist faith. In times of necessity or crisis, a resolve almost always forms among pioneer people facing rejection by a society to substitute for one another, to support, to save one another. These stories point out that the will to rise above environment, to live in harmony with one's professed faith, is really a family of emotions, a whole interconnection, not just the patriarch and matriarch, but all the children. All appear to be kin, and none of them is born to give up. If anything happens to cut one off, the remainder survive and tell the marvelous story. They become something new. In fact, they become, as the scriptures declare, a spectacle to angels and to men. There are at times striking parallels between the story of Adventism and the story of the United States of America, as in the struggle with the issue of discrimination as a result of race, and particularly in the effort to place non-white members in leadership functions. The fact that unseen hands are said to have prepared the way for a great church mission to black communities has strengthened confidence in the movement in spite of a corrosive effect of acts by members who came to the church from areas where segregation was a way of life. The object of this book is not only to record the obvious, those things that have transpired, but to see them in the context of the entire movement, its aims and goals. Quite possibly, for example, not a few of the regulatory procedures and practices in American social life were introduced by churches. In this respect, certainly, Adventists have played a significant role. The U.S. Surgeon General's stand against smoking arose from the Adventist temperance effort, and particularly the film 1 in 20,000, which in a hard-hitting script dramatically traced an advanced case of lung cancer as due to smoking. And it is well known that around the turn of the century, Adventists, with their cornflakes and whole bran bread, literally changed the eating habits of the world. Moreover, recent studies show that they live, on the average, 7 years longer than persons in the normative population. Any black man or woman, therefore, who joins the Adventists cannot help but measurably enhance his health and thus his opportunities in life. The manuscript for this book has been more than 25 years in the making, although 2 full years of the author's time were spent in a concentrated effort to do other significant interviews, writing and rewriting the story. We express deepest appreciation to Neil C. Wilson, who, as president of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, personally sponsored the book before conference officers. His influence secured funds that would make its development possible. We owe a special debt of gratitude to Harry Anderson, who worked patiently to reconstruct the great scenes that have meant so much to this minority segment of the church. A world-famous artist, he took special delight in illustrating this book. Many secretaries have assisted with the typing, but we gratefully acknowledge Rose Marie Toussaint, Audrey Taylor, Daphne Reeder, Cynthia Nutt, Wanda McMullen, Deborah Nullins, and Esther Nelson, for whom at times the manuscript seemed to be a full-blown adventure, blotting out every other necessary task. A special expression of gratitude goes to my wife, Bernice, a well-trained and dedicated teacher, who, with her constant concern for the variety of readers the work might attract, has been my sternest critic. My oldest daughter, Dawn, a perceptive reader who appreciates finely recorded details, often acted as critic and sounding board for a book difficult in the making. Joan, my younger daughter, gave time to other aspects of the work and made valuable suggestions for improving the story. Janet Lewis, librarian for Oakwood College, and Clara Peterson Rock, archivist, provided access to books and documents in their custody. A special committee, formulated by C.E. Bradford, Vice President of the General Conference for the North American Division, spent many hours critiquing the manuscript and supplying valuable information. The committee consisted of C.E. Bradford, Chairman, R.L. Woodfork, Vice Chairman, Ruby L. Jones, Recording Secretary, Janet Lewis, Clara Rock, H.D. Singleton, W.W. Fordham, W.S. Lee, C.E. Dudley, and C.E. Mosley. To them is owed a debt of gratitude. Francis Lewis Mouzon, teacher of journalism, also read and criticized the manuscript. Arthur L. White and Ron Graybill of the Ellen G. White estate made available for inspection numerous letters and articles from their files that greatly enlivened the text. Bert Holoviak was most helpful in providing data on people whose contributions to the church had been all but forgotten. Warren S. Banfield, Eugene Lincoln, Charles E. Bradford, Wesley Cartwright, Walter M. Starks, Ethel Young, Robert H. Pearson, E. Earl Cleveland, Garland J. Millett, William E. Coopwood, Donald B. Simons, Earl Canson, and Major White have read all or parts of the manuscript and have made valuable suggestions. Because of the limits set by its purpose, the book attempts a description rather than a chronicle. It is far from comprehensive, and some of the omissions will outrage those who know the epic as a whole. But the omissions, save for those that could be assigned to ignorance or faulty powers of selection, are deliberate. They have been made in deference to the main line of inquiry. A more complete Seventh-day Adventist history can be found in other books, notably Arthur W. Spaulding's Origin and History of Seventh-day Adventists, Richard W. Swartz' Light Bearer to the Remnant, and C. Mervyn Maxwell's Tell It to the World, The Story of Seventh-day Adventists. The Seventh-day Adventist Encyclopedia, which is part of the Commentary Reference Series, gives the names of elected leaders and their periods of service. In all these volumes, the work is admirably researched, is updated periodically, and covers virtually every phase of the subject. The materials collected for this project represent perhaps the most extensive record of sources on U.S. Black Adventists in existence. They will provide background reading for both academy and college classes in denominational history and, like the story of the Plymouth Graves, will illuminate the past and make available an authentic and historically valid guide for all who would know more about this largest minority within the North American membership. The author hopes that the pages that follow may have something to say not only to students of church history, but also to the general reader, and particularly to those who today are seeking, by a fresh study of Seventh-day Adventist origins, a surer grip on the centralities of the faith and a deepening of their own belief in the providences of God. Lewis B. Reynolds.